In every neighborhood governed by an HOA, there's always tension simmering beneath the surface. Some people love the sense of order, while others feel suffocated by the endless rules and arbitrary fines. In this particular community, a quiet suburban street that looked perfect from the outside, it didn't take much for small things to explode into full-blown wars. And that's exactly what happened when one man decided to give his dog a home of its own. He had recently adopted a rescue dog, a playful golden retriever named Max. For months, Max had been living happily in the family's backyard, with a small wooden doghouse tucked under a tree. It was simple, nothing flashy. Painted in neutral colors, it blended into the landscape. But to one person, it was an eyesore. That person happened to be the HOA president, a woman known for her iron fist and sharp tongue. In the neighborhood, people whispered about her behind closed doors, calling her the Queen of Complaints, because nothing escaped her judgment. A car parked half an inch off the curb? She noticed. A flower planted without approval? She noticed. And now, a doghouse in a backyard barely visible from the street? Of course, she noticed. The first letter came on a Friday afternoon. It was typed in bold font, stamped with the HOA's insignia, and slipped into the mailbox like a declaration of war. The letter stated that the doghouse was a non-approved structure, violating the neighborhood's aesthetic guidelines. If the homeowner did not remove it within 10 days, they would face a fine of $100 for every additional day it remained. It wasn't just about the doghouse, though. The letter carried an unspoken message. In this neighborhood, the HOA president had control, and no one dared to challenge her authority. At first, the homeowner laughed it off. It seemed ridiculous. A small doghouse hidden behind a fence couldn't to possibly be against the rules. After all, the HOA documents never mentioned doghouses specifically. They talked about sheds, pools, and home additions, but nothing about a doghouse. So he ignored it, figuring common sense would prevail. But the second letter was harsher, threatening liens and legal action if the structure wasn't gone. It was no longer about the doghouse. It was about power. That weekend, whispers started spreading among neighbors. Some rolled their eyes and muttered that the HOA had gone too far again. Others stayed quiet, too afraid of getting targeted next. One thing was clear. The president had picked her battle, and she wasn't backing down. And that's when the homeowner made a decision. If they wanted to fight over a doghouse, then a doghouse they would get, but not the one they expected. He went to his garage, pulled out a notepad, and started sketching. If the HOA wanted to make this a problem, he was going to turn it into the biggest spectacle the neighborhood had ever seen. Instead of tearing down Max's modest shelter, he would build something outrageous, something so over the top it couldn't be ignored. Not just a doghouse, but a dog mansion. The idea consumed him over the next few days. He researched designs, measured the backyard, and ordered supplies. It wasn't just about giving Max a new place to stay anymore. It was about making a statement. Every plank of wood, every nail, every detail was carefully planned. He wasn't just building for his dog. He was building revenge disguised as luxury. When the construction started, neighbors peeked curiously from their windows. At first, it looked like a simple project. A larger wooden frame, maybe an upgraded shed. But as the structure began to rise, people realized this was no ordinary build. Walls went up higher than anyone expected, painted with fresh coats of bright white. A miniature porch was added, complete with railings. Windows framed with shutters appeared, not just for ventilation, but for style. Each passing day revealed new surprises. Decorative shingles on the roof, solar-powered lights along the trim, even a tiny weather vane spinning proudly above. It was equal parts hilarious and brilliant. The HOA president noticed immediately. Her car slowed down whenever she drove past the property. Her eyes narrowed, her jaw clenched, and yet she couldn't act until the build was complete. After all, homeowners had the right to make improvements to their property. She just hadn't anticipated anyone using that loophole to this extent. By the time the project reached its third week, word had spread far beyond the street. Neighbors came by to watch the progress, offering encouragement and snacks for the workers. Children pointed excitedly, laughing at the idea of a dog living in what looked like a miniature human house. Even people from outside the neighborhood began to stop by, curious about the dog mansion being built in defiance of the HOA. Finally, the day came when the last nail was hammered, the last coat of paint was brushed on, and the last decorative lantern was lit. The mansion stood proudly in the yard, fully equipped with insulation, a heating and cooling unit, and custom flooring. The inside had been carpeted for comfort, with a plush bed waiting for Max. There was even a flat-screen TV mounted on one wall, playing nature videos designed to keep dogs entertained. The lights glowed warmly in the evening, making the mansion look like a cozy cottage pulled from a fairy tale. And at the center of it all, Max sat proudly on the porch, wagging his tail, the king of his new domain. The crowd of neighbors clapped and laughed, cameras clicked, videos were uploaded to social media, quickly gaining traction. This wasn't just a doghouse anymore, it was a statement, a work of art, and most importantly, a public embarrassment for the HOA president who had started the fight. And, just as the celebration began, a black SUV slowly rolled to a stop in front of the house. The window lowered, and the familiar face of the HOA president glared out, eyes fixed on the mansion. The crowd fell silent for a moment, waiting to see her reaction. She didn't speak. She didn't have to. Her expression said everything. The war had just begun. The morning after the dog mansion's grand unveiling, the neighborhood felt different. The usual quiet hum of sprinklers and distant lawnmowers was replaced by chatter, laughter, and the sound of phone notifications pinging with updates about the now viral attraction. Videos of Max sitting on his porch, surrounded by solar lights and wagging his tail like a royal monarch, had spread quickly across social media platforms. What started as a petty HOA complaint had turned into a spectacle that people couldn't get enough of. But while the community buzzed with excitement, the HOA president seethed in silence. She was used to ruling unchallenged, issuing warnings and fines with little pushback. Now her authority was being mocked publicly. The dog mansion wasn't just an over-the-top structure, it was a direct insult to her leadership. She could feel her grip on the neighborhood slipping, and that was something she would never allow. Within days, the first official letter arrived. Unlike the earlier complaints, this one was thicker, filled with citations from HOA regulations, threats of escalating fines, and warnings of legal action. It was stamped "Final Notice" in bold red ink, a symbol of the president's desperation to regain control. She accused the homeowner of erecting an unapproved dwelling, arguing that it violated multiple aesthetic and property use codes. The letter carried the weight of intimidation, designed to break his resolve. But by then, the dog mansion had taken on a life of its own. Neighbors began dropping by, daily, bringing their kids to see Max's palace. Some even brought their own dogs, joking that they wanted to schedule playdates at the mansion. Photos and videos flooded community groups online, sparking debates. Some argued the HOA was right, rules were rules. But the overwhelming majority sided with the homeowner, seeing the mansion as a creative act of defiance against needless control. For once, the neighborhood wasn't united under fear. It was united in laughter and admiration. The homeowner read the HOA's letter carefully. Instead of panicking, he smiled. He knew this wasn't really about the rules. It was about power. And if the HOA president wanted a fight, she was about to get one. He didn't tear the letter down or hide it. Instead, he pinned it on the front of the dog mansion like a badge of honor. Visitors chuckled when they saw it, snapping photos and posting them with captions like, "Even the HOA can't stop Max." The move infuriated the president. She began patrolling the street more often, her SUV creeping past the house at odd hours, headlights sweeping over the mansion as if she were trying to catch some hidden violation. Neighbors noticed her behavior and whispered about how obsessive she had become. Some even filmed her drive-bys, uploading the clips online with sarcastic commentary. The more she pushed, the more the internet laughed. Unable to control the narrative, the HOA board was called into an emergency meeting. Members gathered in a sterile community hall, tension heavy in the air. The president ranted about the threat to neighborhood order, insisting they had to act quickly before others followed the same path. But cracks began to show. Not every board member shared her zeal. Some quietly admitted they didn't see the dog mansion as a real problem. A few even confessed they found it amusing. For the first time, the president faced resistance from within her own ranks. Still, she pushed forward. The board issued a second round of fines, this time steeper, re-atening thousands of dollars in penalties if the mansion wasn't dismantled. They even hinted at placing a lien on the homeowner's property. The threat was meant to scare him into submission, but instead, it backfired spectacularly. When the letter arrived, the homeowner once again turned it into fuel. He scanned it, enlarged it, and printed it as a giant poster. Then he framed it and mounted it proudly above the dog mansion's front door like an official decree. Visitors howled with laughter. Videos of Max sitting beneath the framed threat captioned, "King Max versus the HOA," spread like wildfire. The mansion was no longer just a neighborhood curiosity. It had become a full-blown viral sensation. Reporters soon caught wind of the story. Local news vans began showing up, interviewing neighbors about the feud. Children proudly declared that Max had the coolest house in town. Retirees chuckled about how the HOA was wasting energy on a dog. Even people from nearby communities began driving by just to catch a glimpse of the infamous mansion. Lines of cars occasionally formed on the street, slowing traffic as people snapped photos from their windows. The HOA president watched in horror as her neighborhood turned into a sideshow. What she saw as a stain on the community's image was, to everyone else, a point of pride. The harder she tried to squash it, the bigger it grew. The homeowner, meanwhile, continued adding to the mansion. He installed a miniature fountain in the front yard, complete with a paw-shaped stone path leading up to the porch. He hung a tiny mailbox with Max's name on it, and neighbors started leaving letters for the golden retriever, treats, toys, and notes of support tucked inside. By the time the mansion had its first-month anniversary, it looked less like a doghouse and more like a tourist attraction. The president, cornered and furious, doubled down once, again. She filed an official complaint with the city, hoping municipal authorities would step in where the HOA had failed. It was a desperate move, and one she was sure would finally shut down the Bantiscan. Madness. But she didn't realize just how far the story had spread, or how much public opinion had already shifted. Because when the city inspector showed up, clipboard in hand, what he saw wasn't a violation. It was a masterpiece, and what he decided next would send shockwaves through the HOA board. When the city inspector arrived, the atmosphere in the neighborhood shifted. Neighbors gathered quietly on their lawns, watching as the official in a bright vest and clipboard made his way up the driveway. The HOA president lurked nearby in her SUV, engine idling, her face tight with anticipation. She believed this was it, the moment when all her complaints would finally be validated. She pictured the inspector shutting down the dog mansion, writing citations, and forcing its removal. But the inspector wasn't in a hurry. He walked slowly around the structure, jotting notes, examining every angle with a calm professionalism that contrasted sharply with the tension in the air. He checked the dimensions, the placement, the materials used. He measured distances from fences and property lines, studying everything with quiet precision. The crowd held its breath. After nearly an hour of careful inspection, he finally closed his clipboard. Neighbors leaned forward, waiting. The HOA president's hand tightened on her steering wheel, and then, in a voice that carried across the street, he delivered his verdict. The dog mansion was perfectly legal. The announcement sent ripples through the crowd. Some gasped, others laughed, and a few even cheered openly. The inspector explained that because the mansion was under a certain square footage, classified as a pet shelter, and fully within property boundaries, it didn't violate any municipal codes. There were no safety hazards, no zoning infractions, nothing the city could act upon. From the city's perspective, Max's mansion was just a very extravagant doghouse, and perfectly acceptable. The HOA president's SUV roared to life as she sped off in frustration, her plan collapsing in real time. For the homeowner, though, this was more than just a victory. It was a shield. With the city's stamp of approval, the HOA's threats lost much of their bite. Every fine, every warning, every accusation suddenly looked hollow. The board could keep blustering, but they couldn't enforce rules that contradicted city law. Word of the inspector's decision spread quickly. By evening, the neighborhood was buzzing again. Neighbors stopped by with congratulations, shaking their heads in disbelief at how far the feud had gone. Someone baked a cake shaped like a miniature doghouse and delivered it to the homeowner's porch. Kids posed with Max in front of the mansion, laughing as parents snapped pictures. But the real shock came a few days later, when a clip of the inspector's visit went viral online. The video captured the moment he declared the mansion legal, followed by the crowd's cheers and the HOA president's dramatic retreat. The internet ate it up. Within days, national outlets picked up the story, framing it as a classic little guy versus HOA battle. Comment sections overflowed with people rooting for Max and mocking the HOA president. The story wasn't just local anymore. It had gone national. Reporters returned, this time from larger networks. News anchors chuckled on live broadcasts as they showed footage of the mansion, describing it as the most luxurious doghouse in America. Some called it a symbol of suburban rebellion. Others praised the creativity and defiance behind it. Suddenly, Max was a celebrity, his mansion a landmark. The homeowner leaned into the momentum. Instead of letting the hype fade, he upgraded the mansion even further. He installed an air conditioning unit for summer days, a heating lamp for colder nights, and a set of motion-activated lights that illuminated the mansion in a warm glow each evening. Even added a mini doorbell, which kids delighted in pressing whenever they visited. Each new addition drew bigger crowds. Cars lined the street on weekends, families bringing their pets just to see the palace that had started as a petty HOA feud. The HOA president, meanwhile, was unraveling. Her once unshakable authority had been reduced to a neighborhood punchline. People whispered about her temper, mocked her obsession, and rolled their eyes when she drove by. Some neighbors who had previously supported her began distancing themselves, embarrassed by her vendetta. Even within the HOA board, loyalty was cracking. A few members questioned why so much energy and money was being wasted on what was clearly a losing battle. But the president couldn't let it go. To her, this wasn't about a doghouse anymore. It was about control, about proving she still ruled the neighborhood. In private, she began plotting her next move. If the city wouldn't side with her, she would escalate elsewhere. Her opportunity came when she stumbled upon a clause buried deep in the HOA's covenant documents. It was vague, outdated, and rarely enforced, but it gave her a new angle of attack. No structures intended for habitation without prior approval. She twisted the language, arguing that because the mansion had power, lights, and air conditioning, it could be considered a habitable dwelling. She framed it as a potential safety concern, suggesting that children might sneak inside, or that it could attract unwanted pests. Armed with this new interpretation, she launched a fresh wave of letters and fines, trying to regain her grip. But this time the homeowner was ready. He didn't just respond quietly. He made the letters public. He pinned them on the mansion's walls like a gallery, inviting visitors to read them for themselves. He even live-streamed himself opening the newest complaint, laughing as Max wagged his tail in the background. The internet erupted again, ridiculing the HOA's desperate attempts to twist the rules. The president's fury boiled over. She called emergency meetings, demanded stricter enforcement, and even threatened lawsuits. But with every step, she only deepened the divide. The neighborhood wasn't united under her anymore. It was united against her. And as tensions reached a breaking point, the homeowner prepared his boldest move yet. He had kept it quiet, working behind the scenes while the HOA flailed. But soon, he would unveil something that would push the mansion from local legend to something far bigger. Because if the HOA thought the mansion was too much already, they hadn't seen anything yet. The HOA president thought she had seen the worst of it. She believed the spectacle would fade once the novelty wore off, that neighbors would grow tired of the attention, and that the homeowner would eventually back down under the weight of her constant pressure. But what she didn't know was that the homeowner had been quietly preparing something that would elevate the mansion from a quirky neighborhood attraction to a full-blown monument. It began innocently enough. A few local businesses, amused by the story and eager to join the buzz, reached out with offers of sponsorship. A pet food company offered free treats in exchange for a small sign posted by the mansion. A local carpenter donated materials, eager for the free publicity of being associated with America's most famous doghouse. Soon, contributions poured in from strangers across the country. People sent toys, furniture, and even miniature chandeliers. The homeowner didn't refuse. He accepted every donation, every gift, every quirky suggestion. And slowly, the dog mansion grew into something far beyond its original design. A second floor was added, complete with a tiny spiral staircase, and a balcony overlooked the yard, adorned with hanging flower baskets. Solar panels were installed on the roof, powering a tiny fan system that kept the interior perfectly climate-controlled. The walls were painted with murals, dogs playing in fields, golden retrievers painted majestically like royalty. Neighbors couldn't believe what they were seeing. Every weekend, new additions appeared, and every weekend the crowds grew larger. Cars clogged the cul-de-sac, forcing the HOA to set up temporary cones to manage the flow of traffic. Families came not just from nearby towns, but from hours away, eager to snap a photo in front of Max's palace. Children squealed with delight, adults laughed in disbelief, and social media swelled with endless posts. Max, of course, loved every moment. He basked in the attention, lounging on the balcony like a king surveying his kingdom. His wagging tail and happy demeanor made him the perfect mascot for the rebellion, and people adored him all the more for it. But while the community celebrated, the HOA president grew increasingly desperate. Her neighborhood was no longer hers, it was Max's. The story had spread so far that journalists from national outlets camped outside, eager for updates. Late-night talk show hosts made jokes about the dog mansion that broke an HOA. Memes flooded the internet, painting the president as a cartoon villain standing against a smiling golden retriever. Every attempt to assert authority only deepened the ridicule. Still, she refused to surrender. She launched another wave of fines, escalating them to astronomical numbers. She filed lawsuits, claiming the mansion devalued surrounding homes. She even tried to petition the city council to pass new regulations, but at every turn, she found resistance. The public was firmly on the side of Max and his owner. Online petitions circulated, gathering tens of thousands of signatures demanding the HOA leave them alone. Politicians, sensing the tide of public opinion, avoided siding with the HOA. The board itself began to fracture. Several members resigned, unwilling to endure the constant humiliation and pressure. Others openly criticized the president, suggesting she was dragging the entire community into ruin. Yet she pushed on, driven less by reason and more by pride. To her, losing this fight meant losing everything she had built her authority on. The homeowner, meanwhile, unveiled his boldest move yet. With the help of donations and volunteer labor, he transformed the yard into a full-fledged dog park surrounding the mansion. Artificial turf was laid down, agility equipment was installed, and benches were set up for visitors. The mansion was no longer just a home for Max. It was the centerpiece of a public attraction. The crowds doubled overnight. Families arrived with their pets, snapping photos, playing on the equipment, and leaving glowing reviews online. Local businesses thrived from the influx of visitors. The once quiet street turned into a weekend hotspot, buzzing with laughter, barking dogs, and the hum of food trucks parked nearby. To the neighborhood, it was a source of pride. To the internet, it was a sensation. But to the HOA president, it was an unforgivable nightmare. Her breaking point came one afternoon when she tried to confront the crowd directly. Marching into the park with papers in hand, she shouted about rules, violations, and fines. But instead of compliance, she was met with laughter. Cameras filmed her tirade, capturing her rage as children and pets played happily around her. The clip went viral within hours, painting her as a caricature of pettiness. She became a symbol, not of authority, but of obsession. The humiliation was unbearable, and in her fury, she decided on an all-or-nothing gamble. If she couldn't win through rules, fines, or lawsuits, she would try to crush the mansion completely. She began making calls, reaching out to higher authorities, spinning tales of safety hazards and community chaos. She framed the mansion as a dangerous nuisance, hoping someone, somewhere, would step in to shut it down. But as she worked behind the scenes, the homeowner was preparing his next counterstrike, one that would leave her with no ground left to stand on. Because now, the dog mansion wasn't just a neighborhood curiosity or even a viral sensation. It was a symbol. And symbols, once they caught fire, were nearly impossible to extinguish. The HOA president was running out of options, but surrender was never in her vocabulary. To her, the dog mansion represented defiance, mockery, and the unraveling of years of carefully maintained control. Each news article, each viral video, each laughing child running through the dog park outside Max's palace chipped away at her pride. And so, with her reputation crumbling, she reached for her boldest, most desperate move yet. She would involve higher authorities. Her first call was to the fire marshal. She claimed the dog mansion posed a fire hazard, that electrical wiring and solar panels created risks for the entire neighborhood. She described it as a ticking time bomb, a disaster waiting to happen. The fire department responded, arriving with trucks and equipment, sirens echoing down the street. Neighbors poured out of their homes, anxious and curious. The president watched smugly from a distance, certain this would be the end. But after a thorough inspection, the firefighters found no issues. The wiring was safe, the installation up to code, the structure secure. Instead of condemning it, the fire marshal complimented the workmanship. As they drove away, neighbors applauded, cheering as if another battle had been won. The president's smugness dissolved into visible frustration. Another plan had backfired. Another spectacle had humiliated her. Undeterred, she moved on to the health department. This time, she claimed the mansion and the dog park acted pests, spreading disease and creating unsanitary conditions. Inspectors arrived, taking samples and walking the grounds. Yet again, they found nothing. The park was clean, well-maintained, and even equipped with waste stations for pets. One inspector was overheard laughing, saying it was cleaner than some public parks. When the report came back clear, the mansion's reputation only grew stronger. The president refused to quit. She escalated to the county zoning office, twisting language, insisting the mansion was no longer a pet shelter but a commercial structure due to the crowds it attracted. She argued it violated zoning codes, trying to force the county to intervene. But the office, already aware of the national attention the case had received, was reluctant to step into a fight that had clearly turned into a public relations nightmare. The paperwork stalled, the claim buried in bureaucracy. With every failed attempt, her grip slipped further. Neighbors who once tolerated her began openly criticizing her. Community forums filled with mocking comments. People drove by just to point at her house, laughing about her failed crusade. What had once been fear of her authority was now ridicule, and she could feel it every time she stepped outside. Meanwhile, the homeowner leaned into the momentum. The dog mansion wasn't just surviving, it was thriving. A non-profit organization approached him, suggesting partnerships for animal welfare. A local news anchor referred to Max as the patron saint of suburban rebellion. Even schools requested field trips to the mansion, framing it as a lesson in creativity and community spirit. The attraction had grown far beyond a neighborhood squabble. It was now a cultural phenomenon. The president, cornered and humiliated, plotted one final move: a full-scale lawsuit. She hired lawyers, pouring HOA funds into a case that claimed the mansion violated covenants, devalued homes, and created nuisances. She envisioned a courtroom victory, one that would finally strip away the smug smiles from her neighbors and restore her power. But lawsuits are public. And when the papers were filed, the story reignited across national media. Reporters swarmed the courthouse, covering the absurdity of an HOA spending thousands to dismantle a doghouse. Commentators tore into the case, portraying it as the height of petty authoritarianism. Donations poured in for the homeowner's legal defense, crowdfunding campaigns raising more than enough to match the HOA's legal firepower. Inside the neighborhood, resentment reached a boiling point. Homeowners were furious that their fees were being drained on what they saw as a personal vendetta. Heated arguments broke out at meetings. Some threatened to recall the president altogether. For the first time, she wasn't just fighting one neighbor. She was fighting her entire community. The case dragged on for weeks, but the longer it lasted, the worse it became for the HOA. Every update fueled fresh waves of outrage online. Max's mansion became a symbol of resistance against pointless bureaucracy, a rallying cry for anyone who had ever felt bullied by authority. Even celebrities began tweeting about it, amplifying the story to millions. By the time the first hearing arrived, the courtroom was packed with reporters, neighbors, and curious onlookers. The homeowner arrived calm, supported by a legal team funded by strangers who believed in his cause. The HOA president, by contrast, looked worn and haggard, her obsession etched across her face. And then came the moment she had feared all along. The judge reviewed the filings, the photos, the city's inspections, the endless media attention. After hours of deliberation, he dismissed the HOA's case entirely, ruling that the dog mansion violated no enforceable codes and posed no harm to the community. The words rang like a gavel striking not just on the case, but on the PR. Precedent's authority. Cheers erupted outside the courthouse. Cameras flashed as the homeowner lifted Max into his arms, both of them beaming. The lawsuit had failed. The HOA president had lost. And the mansion wasn't going anywhere. But the story wasn't over yet. The court ruling may have ended the legal battle, but it had sparked something bigger, something that would change the neighborhood forever. The courtroom loss was more than just a defeat for the HOA president. It was the collapse of her empire. For years, she had ruled the neighborhood with an iron grip, using bylaws and fines as weapons, intimidating anyone who dared step out of line. But now, her authority was gone. Neighbors no longer feared her. They pitied her, ridiculed her, and in some cases, despised her. Within days of the ruling, homeowners organized a petition to remove her from her position. Signatures spread like wildfire. People who had once stayed silent now stood up, eager to reclaim their neighborhood from years of petty harassment. At the next meeting, the room was packed. She walked in, head held high, but the air was heavy with resentment. The vote was swift, the result undeniable. She was ousted. Her exit wasn't graceful. Some said she stormed out in tears, others that she muttered threats of revenge under her breath. But one thing was certain. Her reign was over. The neighborhood, once suffocated under endless rules, felt free for the first time in years. Laughter replaced complaints. Children played without fear of fines, and people began to see their community in a new light. Meanwhile, the dog mansion thrived. What had started as a petty act of defiance against a complaint had evolved into a symbol of resistance and creativity. Families visited from across the city just to take pictures. Dog owners traveled miles to let their pets experience the miniature palace. Local businesses partnered with the homeowner, sponsoring events and fundraisers. Even animal shelters saw benefits, using the mansion as a platform to promote adoption drives. Max, the loyal dog at the center of it all, became something of a local celebrity. He was photographed with tourists, featured in magazines, and even invited onto a morning news show. People called him the dog who took down the HOA, a living mascot for ordinary people standing up to unjust authority. Everywhere he went, he wagged his tail, oblivious to the revolution he had inspired. The homeowner himself found his life transformed. He had never sought fame, only peace and fairness. Yet his story struck a chord, reminding people that sometimes the smallest acts of rebellion can spark the biggest changes. His inbox filled with messages from strangers sharing their own HOA horror stories, thanking him for proving that it was possible to fight back and win. In time, the dog mansion became more than a local attraction. It became a landmark, a destination that represented freedom from pettiness and control. Tour buses began including it on their routes, and the homeowner decided to open the gates weekly for public tours, the proceeds going to animal welfare charities. What had once been the center of conflict was now a source of unity, joy, and generosity. As for the former HOA president, her story faded into obscurity. Some said she moved away, unable to face the embarrassment. Others whispered that she still lived in the neighborhood, bitter and reclusive, curtains drawn tight as the sounds of laughter and celebration drifted across the street. Whatever her fate, the community had moved on without her, stronger and happier than ever. Years later, the mansion still stood, a quirky and enduring reminder of the battle that had reshaped an entire neighborhood. The lights still glowed at night. The air conditioning still hummed in summer, and Max, though older and slower, still lounged proudly in his palace. To visitors, it wasn't just a doghouse. It was a story of defiance, of unity, of how a community toppled tyranny not with anger, but with creativity and determination. And as the homeowner looked out over the smiling faces, the wagging tails, and the joyful chaos that filled his once quiet yard, he realized something profound. The HOA had tried to destroy his small act of love for his dog. Instead, they had created something legendary. The dog mansion was no longer just for Max. It was for everyone, and its legacy would outlast them all.